Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Mulondo. I'm going to present on the subject of community-based care and support. The code is CB10S1. This is the standalone program. I'm going to present this into two sections. The first section is I'm going to give you a tips or practical guide is how do you prepare yourself for your exam. And then also when you're going to write your exam is what you have to look at and how you're going to prepare yourself. And when you're going to write the exam, what is expected from you as a student. Then the second session of my presentation is we're going to look at the content of the subject. And it's very important for you to know that this is just a scope. It does not mean that you don't need to study the whole subject. So it is still expected from you as a student that you need to know the whole content of the subject. You need to familiarize yourself. You need to know the different concepts, the keywords. You have to understand the whole chapters of the subject. So the mistake that most students are doing when they prepare themselves for the exam, and as I said, the purpose of this presentation is to prepare yourself for your upcoming exam, is they only read certain chapters, expecting those are the only chapters that's going to be asked. So it's very important for you that when we look at the examination scope, scope actually means the whole subject. So not just specific units or specific things, but you have to have a total understanding of what is expected from you. So we're first going to look at some guidelines, and as I also present in my earlier presentation, is you have to look at the exam not just from a point of view of writing exam, but you have to be able to make sure that you are ready and you have to prepare yourself. So this is practical examples from my experience with students and questions that students have asked. So this is just a nutshell, just as a guide. Of course, you can have your own program, your own preparation. It all depends on you. So, but as a tutor, my duty is then just to prepare yourself. So there are things that you have to do before the exams, and there are also things that you have to do during the exam. Now, before the exam, it's very important for you to have a 2 months at least a timetable. So 2 months before you're going to write the exam, you have to make sure that you've got a timetable. If your subject is having 15 chapters or 5 chapters or 10 chapters, it is important that you divide those chapters into the period of 2 months. If you want to make it over a period of 1 month, it all depends on you. As I said, you can make it tailor-made. So this is just a guideline. So once you have your timetable and you know that you've committed yourself, you are ready, then it's very important that there are 3 steps that you have to do for you to prepare yourself. The first thing is you have to read through the whole book. Read through the whole chapter, read through the whole book, for you to understand the content and the context of the chapter. So once you've understand and you just read through, during reading, it's very advisable that you have to make notes. Make a circle of words that you don't understand, underline words or concept that you understand or you need some information. And then I will also advise that you need to go and look at the dictionary, what the different content of the subject, of the keywords actually mean. So once you've done it, then you have to make notes. Notes are very important. We have found out that when students are reading through the chapters and they are making notes, notes can be questions on that specific unit or chapter. Notes can be things, additional information that you get. Notes can also be, for an example, a definition of concepts and keywords. So it's very important that you have to make notes, whether you make the notes on your study guide or your manual, or whether you make the notes separately on the paper. It's very important that you have to write down, because this will also help you when you're going to prepare. I always say it's very important for you to come up with a diagram or keywords, for an example. So if there is a question or there is a unit where there are a list of 6 things that you have to remember. For an example, it's very important that you need to create your own code, your own style, just for the sake of understanding and remember the content of that specific chapter. So after you've write the notes, you went through the whole book, the whole subject of 10 units or 10 chapters. Then the third thing that you have to do is you have to do revision, which is very important. And don't revise the day before you're going to write the exam. Preferably, it was advisable if you can do it 3 weeks before you're going to write your exam. You just go through your notes so that you can understand and comprehend what the content of that subject is. So once you have revised, you went through your notes and you understand, it's very important for you to make sure that when you're going to revise, that you know or you comprehend the content. So there's a number of don'ts, and one of them is preferably is don't try to study or try to memorize or try to revise a day before you're going to write a specific subject. Normally what's important is you need to give yourself time. One day before you're going to write a specific subject, you have to rest. You need to refresh your mind. You just need to switch off so that by the time you're going to write your exam, then everything is still fresh and you will remember. And I mean, if you follow the 2 months program of preparation, you won't panic, you won't get the concern that you don't know the subject. You will know that you know the subject. Then the other aspect of preparation, also as a tip for the examination, is when you're going to write your exam. There are 3 things or 4 things that you have to look at. The first thing is when you receive the exam paper, read through the questions, read through all the 6 questions. Don't try to answer right away. First, read through the question. Then secondly, after you've read through the question, then you select the question that's the easier to answer. Always start with a question that's much easier to answer. Because remember, you only have 2 hours or 3 hours to answer the question. So when you start with a question that's very difficult for you to answer, you might waste time. And by the time you come to the questions that you know very well, then you will discover that your time is limited or you've got limited time. It's very important. And then thirdly is when you are going to select the question that you're going to write, and you're going to write, before you're going to write the question, make sure that you understand the content and the context of the question. Don't try to interpret. The problem is many students, when they're going to write the exams, they are so some of them are nervous, some of them are agitated, some of them are impatient. It's very important for the first 10 minutes. Remember, you've got 2 hours or 3 hours to write this paper. So give yourself 10 minutes just to prepare yourself before you're going to write. So by the time you come to the stage of reading the question to understand, you will find it's already 5 minutes or 7 minutes that you still have to write the exam. So read through the question, understand what is required from you to answer. So don't assume what is asked. Make sure that you ask. Then fourthly, which is very important, is don't decode or analyze or interpret the question. Answer the question which is asked. Answer the question. If the question is, say, list, for an example, what are the challenges of home-based caregivers, or discuss the challenges of home-based caregivers, if they receive such a question, don't assume they are talking about home-based care programs. Because some people, they just read home-based care, and then instead of writing about the challenges of home-based caregivers, they write the challenges of home-based care programs. So make sure that you understand the question and you answer the question, which is very important. So those are the tips that I can give you, which is very important for you to prepare for your exam. So I'm going to go through the second session, a section of this presentation, and then it's to looking at the content. And when I'm going to present these thematic areas, it does not limit you not to read the whole subject or the whole manual. So it's very important that you have to read chapter to chapter, from the first chapter to the last chapter, the content, because it's very understanding that you have to understand the subject in context. So, and you can only understand it is once you have read it and you know what you have read, you will remember. So let me quickly run through some of the thematic areas that which are very important that you have to focus on for you to prepare yourself. Remember the presentation I made on the assignments, and then also on the subject itself. You can go through those previous presentation on YouTube. You can also look at your study guide, your manual, and you can also advisedly go to the library and also look at other resources, whether it's Google, internet. So it's very important for you to look at different ways of how to understand the context of the subject. The first one is antiretroviral therapy. Now, ART is very important. Now, remember there is it's very important for you to understand what ARV is all about. Why do we have antiretroviral treatment? Or why do we have antiretroviral drugs, for example? What does it mean? What are this? What is this therapy? So you have to know what it's all about. You have to know what is ART. So you have to read about ART, the different components of ART that you find. How are they work? Why do we use ARTs or ARVs, for example? Who is using ARVs? So it's very important for you to go and to read about ARVs, the therapy itself, looking at the different regimens that are available when it comes to ART. So you have to have an understanding. It's very important. Then you look at nutrition. Why is nutrition so important for those people that are using ARVs, for example? Why do they need to have a balanced diet? So you have to read about the importance of a balanced diet when you're on ARVs. Why is it important? What happens if people are not using healthy nutrition, or they don't use they don't have a balance and a healthy diet? How does that influence the ART they are using? So these are very important. You have to understand, number one, the linkages of ARV and nutrition. So you have to read through them. Then secondly is by now you have to know what is ARV. Remember, there is a difference between HIV and AIDS. So you have to know the difference between the two. Very, very important. Then secondly is you need to know the different stages of infection. The moment you have been infected with the HIV virus, it goes into what does it do, what are the different stages, what happens. You have to know, you have to read through it. And then you are going to look at infection, opportunistic infection when you have AIDS, for example. What kind of infections do you have? What symptoms are there, for example? It's very important. Then also the mode of transmission, or the mode of how can you be infected? It's very important, and this is also important when you're going to look at this. You have to look at different misconceptions about HIV infection. So there's a lot of misconception, a lot of myth, a lot of ignorance when it comes to infection, or the mode of transmission, mode of infection. So it's very important that you have to have a clear understanding to know and to understand what these infections are all about. Then thirdly, when you are going to look at the concept of prevention, remember there is a saying that says prevention is better than cure. And it's so true, is when you are going to have a prevention strategy, and when you're going to look at prevention, I will advise you that you must look at the NSF, the National Strategic Framework of Namibia. You have to look, for example, at the National AIDS Policy. You have to look at also other instruments that are available. You can look at instruments that are available from UNAIDS, looking at what do they do when it comes to prevention. Now remember, there are two types of prevention. There is the primary prevention and there is the secondary prevention. So you have to know the difference of the two. We have already covered this in our previous section, presentation. It is well discussed in your study manual. If you don't know, you can even go further, go to your library, you can go on the internet to have an understanding. There are so many dynamics when it comes to prevention. So prevention to be infected and prevention of reinfection. So have an understanding of, so if you are going to be asked a question in exam about these two types of prevention, you must be able not just to write a one page, but to write a 2-page actually on the two difference. Then fourthly, which is very important, is remember we talked about HIV prevention, infection before. So there are many ways how you can be transmitted, or how you can transmit HIV infection. Now at this section you have to look at also when it comes to prevention. And I'm not going to go into details. As I say, the purpose of this presentation is to prepare yourself so that you can go and study and prepare yourself also for the exam. So you have to look at different ways how you can prevent transmission. And as I say, you have to know what is HIV infection. You have to know how are these infections transmitted. Thirdly, you have to know and also understand is how can you prevent this transmission, which are very, very much important. So then we're going to go into home-based care. Now we assume you are going to work with people who are living with HIV. Now we are so fortunate nowadays that because of ARV and the availability of ARVs, that a lot of people are actually more healthier than and sick. But then you do also find a situation where people are defaulting from the ARTs, or some people are not using their drugs anymore, or some people are having any kinds of opportunistic diseases, and they find themselves bedridden. So how are you going to deal with people that are chronic, and they can't help themselves? And this is where home-based care is very important. You can also look at other countries, South Africa, our neighbor Zambia, Botswana. How do home-based care, what role does home-based care play when it comes to people living with HIV? And so it's very important. So home-based care does play a role when it comes to people living with HIV. So you have to know, you have to understand what role does it play, and what challenges are there when it comes to people living with HIV/AIDS and home-based care. And this is where you have to look then also at the role of families. Because at the end of the day, when somebody is sick or is having a chronic disease in a family, normally it's the family members that's going to look after this person. So it's very important to make sure is what role does family play when it comes to home-based care. How do you link home-based care with family? What can family do to make sure that they will play an effective role? What challenges do families experience when it comes to home-based care? For example, where the health facilities are very far. For example, where they have to treat this patient, or they have to take care, wash the person. What tools do they need? What information do they need? Ignorance is very important. Ignorance is one of the reasons why many people actually die, and why many people are not living. So it's very important to make sure, how are you going to make sure that you're going to educate family members to understand that they've got a very important role when it comes to home-based care, and to care for those that are chronic. And when I'm looking at home-based care, it's not just limited for people living with HIV/AIDS. It's also people that are actually suffer from cancer or any other chronic diseases. So and you can also look at palliative care as another kind of home-based care. So palliative care is more looking at a formal hospice type of care, which you can also use when it comes to a home setup. Now, the reason why they say home-based care is they assume that you have this chronic patient that's living at home, the person is no more in a health facility, but it's at home. Now, what are you going to do to make sure that while this person is at home, you're going to take care of them? And this is where you have to commit yourself and then also to volunteer. Then the other aspect is stigma and discrimination, which is very important. You have to understand, you have to know the difference between stigma and discrimination. What is discrimination? What is stigma? You have to define it. Then you have to look at it's how are people being discriminated? Why is discriminated so bad? How does discriminate contravene any basic human rights of an individual? And discrimination, it's something that can actually which can be dealt with according to a constitution, according to your basic right as a human being. So it's very important that you have to look at that, and especially in the light of people living with HIV/AIDS. Then, of course, you're going to look at monitoring and evaluation. If you have a home-based care program, how you're going to monitor the program of this or implementation of the program, and then you are also going to see how are you going to evaluate the impact of this program. So it's very important that you have to read about M&E, or monitoring and evaluation. Then there is another strategy by UNAIDS. We call it the 90-90, 90%, preventing 90% of infection. Make sure that 90% of people are on ART. So these are the strategies that UNAIDS is having. So make sure that you read about the 90-90. We've talked about 90-90 so many times. Go to your library, look at UNAIDS 90-90 strategy. So how are you going to implement the strategy in Namibia, for example? How important is this strategy? You're going to link the strategy with the strategic sustainable development goals, for example. So these are the strategies that UNAIDS have put in place to help countries to make sure that they're going to cover the 90% target, especially when it comes to the fight against HIV/AIDS. So make sure that you read about the 90-90, 90-90, 90% as a UNAIDS strategy for you to prepare yourself. Then the other aspect is support groups, especially for people that are living with HIV/AIDS. It's what role does support group play? How can you use support group as a strategy to make sure that you assist many of these people? How can you use support groups, for example, to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS? So it's very important for you to know what are the support groups, what role does support groups play, and also what challenges are there when it comes to support groups, which are very important. Then, of course, home-based care, as I say, home-based caregivers are volunteers. Whether it's in a family or whether it's within a community, those people that are actually doing home-based care are volunteers. Many of them are not being paid. Many of them are not getting a salary. Many of them are not recognized. Many of these caregivers, for example, are not known. Many of these caregivers are working behind the scenes, but they are making a big difference in individuals' life and in the life of community. So, and this is where you have to know what are these volunteers doing. And then, which is very important also, is you have to know that these volunteers are facing a lot of challenges, and you have to discuss in details what are these challenges, what problems do they face, and what do they do to overcome this problem. And for example, one of them is the challenge of burnout, and burnout means they are overworking themselves. So what do these home-based caregivers do, whether it's within a family or within a community? How do they deal with these challenges or these problems? So it's very important that you have to have an understanding about home-based care, the challenges, and then also the intervention. So I have come to the end of my presentation, and I hope that this presentation will help you to prepare for your exam, and I wish you then all the best. Thank you.